Right now, it's time for our new tips segment. And it's brought to you this morning with Byrd Byrd, LLC, attorneys at law. They're elder law attorneys in Bowie and in Prince Frederick. Not just good lawyers, good counsel. And we're here today with attorney Jessica Estes. Good morning, Jessica. Thanks for calling in to 1430 WNAV.
Thank you, Bill. Good morning.
Good morning to you. Hey, why is long-term care planning so important?
Okay, well, in this area, and when I say this area, I mean the Baltimore, D.C. metro region, a nursing home can cost as much as $8,000 to $10,000 per month. That's a lot of money, and most people simply cannot afford to pay that. According to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, 70% of people turning age 65 can expect to use some form of long-term care during their lives. Yet the majority of individuals do not have long-term care insurance. Instead, people mistakenly believe that their health insurance will pay for their long-term care needs or that they will not need long-term care. Unfortunately, Bill, these people find out too late that they were wrong.
Wow. So if someone does not have long care insurance but requires long-term care, how do they pay for it?
They're either going to use their own resources to fund their care, or they're going to have government programs such as Medicare and Medicaid help pay for it.
Now, for those of us who may not know, what's the difference between Medicare and Medicaid?
That's a very good question, because many people who come into our office are confused with Medicaid and Medicare. Medicare is a health insurance that most of us become eligible for on our 65th birthdays, provided we have worked and paid into the system. Under certain circumstances, Medicare will cover the first 20 days at a nursing home in full and may cover a portion of the cost for an additional 80 days. After that, though, Medicare does not pay anything toward the long-term care costs. Medicaid, on the other hand, is a needs-based program that helps qualified individuals pay for medical and long-term care costs. There are several different Medicaid programs, but today, when I say Medicaid, I mean long-term care Medicaid. Long-term care Medicaid helps individuals pay for long-term care at a nursing home by supplementing their income to cover the monthly cost.
You know, I've heard that you have to spend down all your assets until you have nothing left before you'll qualify for Medicaid. Is that really a true thing?
No, absolutely not. Medicaid is a complicated set of rules, and each state's rules are different. A lot of people think you have to spend down those assets because in Maryland you cannot have more than $2,500 as of the first of the month in which you're applying for benefits. However, if you do proper planning for long-term care, you can preserve most, if not all, of your assets and still qualify for Medicaid.
You know, I've also heard that Medicaid has a 5-year look-back period. Is that true?
Yes, Medicaid does have a 5-year look-back period, and simply what that means is the state of Maryland has the right to look at all your financial records for the 5 years immediately prior to your application date. The state is basically looking to see if you've given away money which could have been used to pay your cost of care at the nursing home. So if you've given money away, the state will impose a penalty period, which is based on the amount that you have gifted, during which period the state will not pay any benefits. So that's why it's so important to make sure you have a qualified attorney to advise you on the proper long-term care planning, especially if you do not have long-term care insurance or a substantial amount of assets.
Wow. Now, what are some of the pitfalls to avoid when planning for long-term care?
Okay, so some of the pitfalls that we find when people go to attorneys to deal with long-term care, they don't really think about what benefits might be available to them in the future. So one of the things that people do oftentimes is transfer their home to a revocable living trust. If you do that for Medicaid purposes, it is a fully countable asset, which means your home will have to be sold or the proceeds will have to be spent down below that $2,500 limit before the person will be eligible for Medicaid. Or you could transfer your home back into your name individually, but then Medicaid would be able to place a lien against it, or they could file a claim against your probate estate when you die. Also, life estate deeds. These are deeds that people sometimes do where essentially they own the property for and during the term of their natural life, and then immediately upon their death, the property goes to what we call the remainderment. Life estate deeds with powers, again, will be a fully countable asset for Medicaid purposes, so the home must either be sold or transferred back to your sole name. And again, Medicaid could place a lien against that, or they could file a claim against your estate when you die. People get confused with the IRS and the gifting rules and Medicaid's gifting rules. So whereas the IRS will allow $14,000 per year to any number of individuals without having to report those gifts. Medicaid does not. So for Medicaid purposes, those gifts will be subject to penalty. Oftentimes, people may want to set aside money for their children's college education, so they invest in 529 plans. These are great plans if you're going to use the money and you know your kids are going to go to college and they're going to spend the money on allowable college expenses. But again, unfortunately, for Medicaid purposes, these plans will be fully countable assets. So in order to qualify for Medicaid, the funds in the 529 plan must be spent down below that $2,500 limit. Not only will these plans make you ineligible for Medicaid, but you could face heavy tax consequences and withdrawal penalties if you don't use these funds for eligible college expenses. Another thing we see with regard to durable general powers of attorney, most people have a financial power of attorney, but you want to make sure that your named agent is going to be authorized to gift assets, engage in Medicaid planning, and is going to be able to create and fund irrevocable trusts. That way, if you're unable to do it yourself, your agent can implement a plan for your long-term care needs. And then finally, I would advise extreme caution when adding your children or siblings or others to your accounts as a joint owner for convenience. This could subject those accounts to their creditors. The accounts would pass outside of probate automatically to the joint account holder, which may not be your intent. And also, if the joint account holder contributes funds to the account, Medicaid will presume that the entire account is the Medicaid applicant's funds.
Wow. Okay. If any of our listeners, you just mentioned a whole lot of different things, and I don't know if everybody caught all that, okay? Because if any of our listeners have additional questions or want to learn more about long-term care planning, how do they get a hold of you?
Well, I can be reached at 301-464-7448. I'm extension 109. Or they can reach me via email at jestes@byrd.com. Also, I will be hosting an informal workshop on Monday, May 12th from 5:30 to 7 p.m. at our offices in Bowie. That's located at 14,300 Gallant Fox Lane, Suite 120. The workshop is free, but space is limited to 10 people, so you need to call and reserve your seat. There will also be light refreshments served. We do these workshops on the second Monday of every month, so if you cannot make the May 12th date, we have workshops planned for June 9th and July 14th as well. And I also want to remind everyone to tune in next week as my colleague Brian Ritter will be back discussing provisions that every power of attorney should contain.
That sounds good. And Jessica, thanks for talking to us this morning on 1430 WNAV. I'm sure we'll be chatting again in the future.
All right. Thanks, Bill, for having me.
It's our pleasure. That's Jessica Estes from Byrd Byrd LLC, attorneys at law, elder law attorneys with offices in Bowie and Prince Frederick, Maryland. Not just good lawyers, good counsel.